The world was once simple, like a small ball, green fields, and the sounds of birds announcing the beginning of the morning. But in a corner of England, a spark ignited that changed everything. It was not an ordinary fire, but a fire of steam and iron. From it emerged wheels, smoke, and factories that never slept. And in the silence of the night, the sound of machines began to become the music of the new era. The earth turned into a massive workshop, and the sky into a cloud of coal. Men, women, and children came to live amidst the iron, chasing a livelihood in a noise that never ended. Their dreams were simple, but life was not. This is the Industrial Revolution, the time when iron awoke and man fell asleep. A journey that changed the face of history and redefined the meaning of work and the meaning of pain. Before we begin this journey, tell me, from which country are you following us now, and what time is it at this moment? In the mid-18th century, England seemed like any quiet European country. People lived off agriculture, and the countryside was the heart of life. Horses pulled carts slowly, and water turned the mills, as it had for centuries. No one could have imagined that this tranquility concealed an explosion that would change the world. In 1756, a man named James Watt began to develop a small steam-powered engine. His idea was simple on the surface, but it was the key that opened the door to a new era. When that engine turned for the first time, its sound was different from anything people had heard before. A sound like the exhalation of a metal beast preparing to awaken. Small factories began to spread near the rivers because water was necessary to cool the steam and run the gears. Then, soon, tall chimneys stretched across the horizon, spewing thick smoke. The cities no longer knew the smell of damp earth, but the smell of burning coal. The night became gray, and the day was no longer as clear as it had been. The fields began to empty of farmers, drawn by the promises of work in the new factories. There, in the heart of the nascent industrial cities, hope mixed with exhaustion. People saw in the machines an opportunity for a better life, but they did not yet realize that the machine would demand its price. London, Manchester, and Birmingham were growing at an unprecedented rate. Small houses crowded around the factories, and the sounds of hammers never stopped, day or night. Everything was moving, everything was changing. Even time itself began to move at a speed unknown to humans before. In the streets, children ran barefoot amidst the smoke, carrying pieces of coal or transporting workers' tools. This was not yet exploitation, but the beginning of a new time whose features were not yet clear. People thought this was the bright future, and that steam would make life easier. But as the years passed, they would discover that the smoke had another face. Thus was born the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a dawn polluted by the smell of iron and coal, but it was the beginning of a world unlike any before it. A dawn in which people did not see the sunrise, but the rise of smoke. With the spread of these new machines, steam was no longer just an invention, but a spirit that moved the world. And with every wheel that turned, another machine appeared, faster and more greedy for human effort. And from here, the next story begins, when iron spoke. The spark of steam was no longer just a strange experiment in a small workshop. In the decades following the mid-18th century, iron began to speak louder than ever before. The sounds of wheels, the whistles of locomotives, and the roar of presses became the new language the world spoke. Around 1780, the first steam engines appeared inside the major factories. Workers watched them with a mixture of awe and fear, for they had never seen a machine move with such power. For the first time, it was possible to produce vast quantities of goods in a short time. Textiles, iron, coal, everything became faster, cheaper, and more present in the markets. Then came the power loom, the invention that changed the face of the cloth industry in England. It had previously relied on hand weaving, which required patience and precision. But now, machines wove in moments what used to take days. Dozens of looms were gathered in vast halls, buzzing with noise, and the worker became part of the machine itself, standing among them like someone watching a creature of metal and fire. In the early 19th century, iron moved out from the factory walls and onto the roads. Steam locomotives appeared, and railways were born. In 1824, the first trial run of a locomotive pulling carts full of coal and passengers took place. That moment was like magic. The ground shook, the smoke rose, and the wheels made music no one had ever heard before. People lined the sides of the road, clapping and shouting with a mix of astonishment and joy. Time had begun to move at a new speed. But iron did not speak alone. It dragged everything around it with it. The mines went deeper in search of coal, the factories swelled, and other countries began to imitate what England had done. France, Germany, and then America all entered the race. It was as if the whole world had suddenly awakened to a single sound, the sound of the machine. With this astonishing progress, the balance of life began to tilt, bit by bit. Every minute was now measured by production, and every movement was calculated by its cost. Time was no longer for rest or contemplation, but for speed, precision, and achievement. Iron was not just speaking, it was commanding, and the people were obeying. Steam had become the beating heart of the new era, and iron its restless tongue. And amidst this clamor, man was discovering that he had created something stronger than himself, something that could not be easily controlled. As the scope of industry widened, cities began to grow without direction. People gathered around the factories, and houses rose as if chasing the smoke in the sky. Nature was no longer as it was, and the air was no longer as pure as before. And so, a new world was born, cities without a sky. At the dawn of the 19th century, British cities began to grow at a speed unprecedented in history. Green fields slowly disappeared under layers of brick and smoke, and quiet villages transformed into bustling, sleepless cities. This growth was not natural. It was more like a massive urban explosion driven by the new factories that filled the horizon. In the city of Manchester, chimneys rose until they covered the sky. In Liverpool, the ports turned into forests of sails and goods coming from everywhere. Sheffield became known as the City of Steel, where people heard nothing but the sound of the hammer on iron. Every city became a giant factory that lived, breathed, and emitted smoke. The smoke covered the streets like a dense, unforgiving fog. When the rain fell, it did not clean the earth but turned it into black mud filled with coal residue. The windows were dusty, and the rivers changed color from clear to gray. Even the smell of the air was nothing like the past, a mixture of iron, coal, and dampness. The population grew to a level the old cities could not handle. In the narrow alleys, they built cramped, adjoining houses where light barely entered. Entire families lived in a single room, sleeping on a cold floor and waking to the noise of the nearby factories. At night, when everyone slept, the sound of the machines behind the walls did not rest, as if the city itself did not know sleep. The streets were filled with vendors, workers, and carts loaded with coal and cotton. The horses tired, and the wheels groaned over the stones, but no one stopped. Everything moved quickly toward the unknown. People walked with their heads bowed, with no time to look at the sky because it simply could not be seen. In the evening, the orange lights emanating from the factory windows colored the fog with a strange hue, like an inverted dawn. The city seemed alive, but in reality, it was gasping from exhaustion. It no longer resembled a home inhabited by people, but a huge machine that people lived inside. The gardens disappeared, the birds left, and nature became something outside the city's borders. Man became part of a system with no room for rest. In those years, between 1810 and 1850, the face of England changed completely. It was no longer clear where the countryside ended and the city began, as chimneys rose in every direction, announcing that the new era was forcefully imposing itself. The cities were breathing with difficulty, but no one thought of stopping. Everyone was busy with production, with money, and with the race toward tomorrow. And no one knew that behind this apparent prosperity, there was pain waiting in the heart of the darkness. A pain that would be revealed by the gears of the factories and the dust of the mines, as we get closer to the lives of those who carried this era on their shoulders. And so, while the cities grew and became more clamorous, there was another world inside them that no one saw. The world of the workers, the children, and the women who lived between iron and fire. In that dark world, there was no dawn, no rest, but endless work and a heavy silence. There, under the wheels, the next story begins. Between the restless factory chimneys and the roar of machinery that filled the sky, the lives of the workers revolved in an endless circle. From the first dawn until after darkness fell, the working hours stretched on as if forever. And in the middle of this iron world, thousands of children, women, and men lived a bitter struggle with fatigue, hunger, and danger. In the early 19th century, children became part of the daily scene in the factories. They were 8 or 9 years old, small enough to crawl between the gears and pipes to clean them. Their small hands slipped between the sharp cogs, and how many hands lost their fingers in a single moment. There were no schools for them, no games, no sunlight they knew. The day for them began with the factory whistle and ended with its sound again. In the mines, the tragedy was even harsher. The young ones descended into the depths of the earth, carrying oil lamps, dragging coal carts with their hands and knees. The air was suffocating, and the dampness clung to their clothes. Sometimes, the rocks would suddenly collapse, swallowing small bodies that no one would remember. Their wages were meager, barely enough for food, but need was harsher than fear. The adults were no better off. The men spent their lives in the furnaces and foundries where the fire never went out. The women stood for long hours in the spinning and weaving mills, winding threads with threads of their own sweat and patience. 12 hours of continuous standing in a deafening noise and dust that filled their lungs. Their bodies weakened, but their hands never stopped, for every minute meant a small wage that could feed an entire family. In those years, between 1820 and 1850, the work reached its peak. There were no laws to protect the rights of workers, and no one asked about their age or health. The factory was everything: home, school, and destiny. It was normal to see a child sleeping on a pile of cloth near a turning machine, or a man continuing to work despite a bleeding injury. No one stopped, because whoever stopped was replaced by another. With all this hardship, there was a small, unextinguished spark in the hearts of the people. Mothers smiled at their children despite their fatigue, and men exchanged light jokes between work shifts, as if they were confronting iron with laughter. But behind those pale faces were souls searching for a mercy that was absent amidst the smoke. The Industrial Revolution, despite its glory, was a harsh time for humanity. Under the wheels and inside the mines and factories, the workers paid the price of progress with their sweat, their tears, and their lives. As time went on, some of them began to wonder in secret, is justice possible? Does anyone hear our voices amidst this noise? While the masses of workers were bleeding with fatigue at the bottom of the cities, there were other men at the top, watching the smoke from their high windows, counting their profits, and smiling at a future they saw as theirs alone. There, on the other side of the city, the next story begins, the story of the emperors of iron and money. While the workers toiled in the depths of the factories and mines, on the other side of the city, other men were rising rapidly to the top. Men whose faces were not stained by coal, but who reaped fortunes from every speck of dust breathed by those workers. In those years, a new generation of the wealthy was born, a generation that would later be known as the industrial magnates. In the first half of the 19th century, new names began to shine in the skies of Britain. The owners of textile mills in Manchester, iron refineries in Sheffield, and railway financiers in London. Each one of them saw in the machine a path to gold, not just a tool for production. Every extra minute of work, every new hand in the factory, meant a greater profit. While the people counted the hours, those magnates counted the profits. Mansions were built on the outskirts of the cities, with vast gardens and high walls. The clear glass in their windows and the marble on their floors were the product of the workers' own sweat. In the evening, when the tired slept on the cold ground, the tables in the mansions of the rich were filled with food, candles, and music. Two worlds living in the same place, but separated by a distance not measured in meters, but in absent justice. In that period, a new term appeared, the businessman. A person who works not with his hands, but with his mind, his money, and his investments. Money began to move freely between cities, transforming from a means of living to a means of control. Banks financed projects, factories expanded, and railways connected cities. Everything revolved around one word: profit. Between 1840 and 1860, the fortunes of these men multiplied in a way history had never known. England in those years was the heart of the industrial world, the center of trade and finance. Its ships carried goods to every continent, and gold returned to it from everywhere. But with all this wealth, poverty was also increasing. The prosperity of the few required the breaking of the many. From this paradox, a new idea was born that would change the face of the economy, that the market is stronger than the government, and that profit justifies everything. No one was yet talking about justice or equality. The laws protected property, not workers. Money became the language of the era, and whoever did not know it was excluded from life. But history is not merciful to long silence. From among the noise and the smoke, faint voices began to rise. Voices that spoke of injustice, of wages, and of the human being who had become a shadow of himself. These voices were weak at first, but they would grow and change everything. At a time when the wealthy thought the world had settled in their favor, in the depths of the factories, men and women were planning something different. 4 words never heard before, about justice, dignity, and the right to life. From those faint whispers, voices in the dark would soon be born. Silence had reigned over the factories for many long years. The sound of the machines covered everything, even the sound of man himself. But over time, this silence began to crack, slowly, like an old wall tired of bearing injustice. In the first half of the 19th century, the lives of the workers revolved in a closed loop: work, then sleep, then work again. But they began to feel that what was happening was not their destiny, but a system that could be changed. With every conversation they whispered in the dark, a new idea was born. Around 1830, the first workers' associations began to appear in the major British cities. They were not yet legal, and joining them was a real risk that could mean prison or dismissal from work. Nevertheless, people gathered in old pubs and churches, talking about justice, about wages, and about the long hours that were stealing their lives. They called themselves brothers, as if they were facing the world and its merciless machines together. In the city of Manchester, the first peaceful gatherings took place. Thousands of men and women, walking in their work clothes, carried signs on which they had written simple words: "We want to live." But the police dispersed them with violence, and some were injured and killed. From that day on, no one forgot that moment. The people understood that the path to change would not be easy, but it had already begun. With growing awareness, a new ideology emerged, explaining what was happening to the world in a different language. In 1848, a book was published that would cause a stir throughout Europe. Its title was The Communist Manifesto, and it was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They were 2 young men, angry at the injustice they saw every day. They wrote about the workers who make everything and own nothing, and about the rich who grow richer as the toil of others increases. Their words were bold, but they found an echo in the hearts of millions. The idea of trade unions began to spread like a quiet fire. In the 1850s, governments began to recognize them gradually, under the pressure of reality. The workers now had someone to negotiate on their behalf, and the weak voice had an echo that could be heard from afar. Things did not change overnight, but the wheel of history had begun to turn in a new direction. The first strikes were met with force, but with each new strike, the fear lessened. The workers realized that their strength was not in money, but in their numbers and in their unity. For the first time, it was not the factory that issued the orders, but the worker who had the word, enough. In those years, the shape of British society slowly changed. Parliament began to discuss new laws, including limiting working hours and banning child labor in mines and factories. They were small steps, but they were the beginning of a more just world. The people had proven that a voice, no matter how faint, could break the wall of silence if it continued to echo. Those voices born in the dark were the nucleus of the change that would shape the face of the industrial world for decades to come. The Industrial Revolution had planted the seeds of pain, but from the womb of this pain, hope was born. As the years passed, those voices grew and spread until they could no longer be stopped. But while the cries filled the streets, a new light was dawning on the horizon, the light of electricity, steel, and inventions that would open a new chapter in human history. There, the next stage of the story begins. In the second half of the 19th century, the world stood on the threshold of a new chapter in its history. After the smoke had covered the skies of the cities, and after man had learned to tame iron and steam, another spark began to ignite the horizons, the spark of light. The second revolution was different from the first. It no longer revolved around coal and machinery, but around electricity, steel, and oil. This time, the changes were not limited to England alone but extended to Europe, America, and the whole world. The earth itself was breathing a new speed, and minds did not know how to stop discovering. Around 1870, what can be called the beginning of the age of steel appeared. This strong metal replaced the old iron and allowed for the construction of bridges and tall buildings. Cities began to rise toward the sky, and with them rose the ambitions of man himself. Everything became possible thanks to this metal that does not rust or yield. Then came electricity, the greatest gift that changed the shape of the night forever. In 1877, the innovator Thomas Edison registered the patent for his invention of the electric light bulb. For the first time, the candles went out in the streets of New York, and the lights of lamps ignited in the windows. People went out at night just to look in amazement at the new light, as if they were seeing a small day born from the heart of darkness. It wasn't long before factories began to use electricity instead of steam, to work faster and longer, without stopping. The oil wealth was beginning to emerge. From the depths of the earth came a black liquid that would change the shape of the world forever. Oil began to be used to run engines and generate energy, and soon its value surpassed that of gold itself. In America, Russia, and the Middle East, new races began for its control. Oil had become the heart of the new era, feeding every machine, every city, and every future war. In transportation, the greatest miracle was the fast trains and the ocean-crossing steamships. In 1869, the work on the Transcontinental Railroad in America was completed, linking the East with the West and turning the continent into a single, connected world. A few years later, metal ships began to cross the Atlantic in days instead of weeks. The world became smaller, closer, and more connected than ever before. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, and sound began to cross distances as it had never done before. A few years later, the first global telegraph networks appeared, connecting the continents with a wire under the sea. For the first time in history, news could be heard in the moment, not after months of waiting. The world had become an interconnected village, even though the word, globalization, was not yet known. All these discoveries made man feel that he was approaching perfection. The 19th century was about to end, and the world was shining as if it had been born anew. Cities were lit, factories were becoming smarter, and scientists spoke with confidence of a coming century without ignorance or poverty. But behind this brilliance, there were still unanswered questions. Can man keep up with this progress? Will the machine remain his servant, or will it one day become his master? The second revolution was a promise of prosperity, but it was also the beginning of an era of competition between nations. Every country wanted to be the strongest, and every inventor wanted to be ahead of his time. The world was entering a race without end, a race between light and shadow, between man and what his hands had made. And as this race intensified, signs of fatigue began to appear again. Cities grew more than they should, factories became greedier, and people lived faster than they could feel. And from here, a different stage begins, the stage in which we will reveal the hidden price of progress. As the 20th century began, the world seemed brighter than ever before. Cities sparkled with lights, trains moved at speeds no one had dreamed of, and inventions followed one another every day like miracles. But beneath this brilliance, there was an unseen price, a price not paid with money, but with the soul. Life had changed at a speed that exceeded man's ability to adapt. The day became longer than necessary, and the night shorter than it should be. People no longer knew silence, for every moment was filled with the sound of an engine, a whistle, or a ceaseless noise. It seemed that the whole world was running, but no one knew where to. In the great cities like London, Paris, and New York, tall buildings rose, and the streets were filled with cars and electric trams. But in the back alleys, the houses were crowded with poor families who had not benefited from this progress. Dirt accumulated in the rivers, and the sky was drowned in the smoke of the factories. Even the rain became black, carrying with it the smell of iron and gas. Nature itself began to groan, as if tired of man. And pollution was not the only price. The man who had created all this began to feel like a stranger in the world he had built. He lived more among machines than among people. In the factories, offices, and noisy cities he lost his sense of calm and belonging. He became just a number in a register or a cog in a huge, merciless system. Even the faces in the streets became similar, passing without meeting the eyes. In that era, a new term appeared, alienation. Thinkers wrote about it with sadness and fear. It was the feeling that man had become distant from himself, and that the things he had built with his own hands had begun to control him. For what is the use of light if it extinguishes the warmth of the heart? And what is the point of speed if it robs us of the ability to stop? With the increase of factories and mines, disease began to creep silently among the workers. Diseases of the lungs, skin, and bones, as a result of the smoke, dust, and heavy metals. Medicine at that time was not able to save everyone, and death was a natural part of the work cycle. All this was happening in the background while the world celebrated progress and invention. In modern homes, the rooms were filled with new tools: the light bulb, the telephone, the radio, then the car. But something disappeared from people's lives: simplicity. The neighbor no longer knew his neighbor, and the night was no longer for rest, but for completing work. Even the child no longer played in the street as he used to, but was surrounded by noise from every side. The world was entering the age of the machine, and the machine, in turn, was entering the heart of man. With all this change, a new idea began to form in the collective consciousness: that progress is not free, and that behind every achievement, there is a bill not paid with money, but with balance and serenity. Man had learned how to control fire, but he had not learned how to control his ambition. As the years passed, wars began to approach, carrying with them the fruits of this development. Airplanes, cannons, and poison gases, everything that man had made to raise his standard of living returned to threaten his existence. The world entered the 20th century shining with light, but carrying within it a long shadow of danger. Man had obtained what he wanted: comfort, speed, and power. But in return, he lost something no less valuable: peace. And so, after a century of steam, iron, and invention, the world stopped to ask, was all this worth it? As we enter a new era, the Industrial Revolution is no longer just history, but a living legacy that still lives in everything we see and touch. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world had completely changed, but the effects of the Industrial Revolution had not disappeared. They had simply put on new clothes. The iron that was once forged in old factories is now a part of everything we touch today, from cars to bridges, from airplanes to the phones we carry in our hands. The revolution has left its mark on every corner of modern human life. In 1937, the first metal bridges spanned vast rivers in America and Europe. In the world wars, iron turned into a formidable weapon, reminding humanity that what it had made for construction could also be used for destruction. But after the wars laid down their burdens and the cities began to be rebuilt from under the ashes, iron returned anew. Towering skyscrapers, more efficient factories, and networks connecting the world as never before. Science progressed at an astonishing speed. The electric motor, the airplane, the car, then the computer, and the internet appeared. All these inventions were but a direct extension of that spark that had ignited centuries ago in England. The steam that once turned the wheels is today the idea that moves minds. The world has become a single village, but that village is still inhabited by the same old contradictions. Between wealth and poverty, between work and rest, between man and machine. The shape of the smoke has changed, but it has not disappeared. The factories have changed, but they still turn without stopping. And the worker has changed, but he still sells his time and effort to live. It was the Industrial Revolution that gave birth to the age of electricity, then electronics, then artificial intelligence. Every modern machine carries within it the echo of the first hammer, the smell of old coal, and the sweat of the worker who began the journey more than 2 centuries ago. In the end, the Industrial Revolution was not just a chapter in history, but the beginning of a story that is still being written. A story of man who dreamed of controlling iron, only to end up becoming a part of it. Yet hope remains. As long as we have a beating heart and a remembering voice, the humanity that ignited the first spark will not be extinguished. And so, we reach the end of the journey, from smoke to light, from steam to artificial intelligence. But the questions remain the same. Where is humanity headed, and how much must it pay for what it calls progress? Perhaps we do not have all the answers, but we know that behind every machine, every tower, and every invention, there is always a human who once stood at the dawn of smoke, dreaming only of living a life.